Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. Now, first of all, I would like to say to everyone who isn't on my Discord and doesn't read the show descriptions, the part 2 of my talk with our friend Andrew Heaton is coming out tomorrow. See, we had planned this economics talk and then it switched to geopolitics like long time before this whole mess happened. And it's a long and meaningful conversation. Really, it was about 2 hours long, maybe even longer. But then Kursk happened. And I wanted to do this event and everything. And all of you, dear listeners, proper justice. Because to me, it seems that everyone with a pulse and a microphone has already made a silly episode on this. And I just want to do something different here. Because I myself get tired of just sensationalist clickbait, so I dig deep this time. I have slept very little. I had Signal and Telegram conversations with everyone that I could have got on the contact list that's even near the front and informed about the situation. And, well, I have to give you a warning that obviously there is a significant amount of stuff and significant stuff that I just I wasn't allowed to include on the show because that didn't run well past my contacts, and I want to keep those people and, all the informational silence. So if this sounds a bit rambly to you, that's because of overwork, undersleeping, because I haven't slept 2 nights this week, which is crazy. But really, I was generally trying to give you something meaningful. That's more than the usual, oh, wow, look at what happened, mixed with unrealistic theories and speculation, because in this front, oh boy, I have some disappointing feelings about certain YouTubers and podcasters out there. But, explanations and intros begun. Let's start with what actually has happened. You see, on Monday night, Ukrainian troops stationed in the Sumy region began shelling the neighboring Kursk region in Russia. By Tuesday morning, the armed forces of Ukraine crossed the Russian border, catching the Russian army by surprise. Despite the presence of Russian reconnaissance drones, which frequently provide footage, this Ukrainian armed column went unnoticed. It appears the Russian general staff assumed the concentration of Ukrainian troops was merely a response to some warnings about another potential Russian attack on Ukraine's Sumy region. As a result, the armored column only encountered border patrol troops and conscripts, who were easily captured. Well, as they had the element of surprise, the Ukrainians advanced about 12 kilometers or 7.5 miles into Russian territory. And obviously, this operation has been conducted in almost complete silence, which separates it from the previous raids where, if you remember, all these Legion of Russia guys and all these people, they were posting pictures and photos and everything. But right now, if someone says that they know more than you will after this episode, don't believe them unless they're directly Ukrainian, because I highly doubt it's even possible at this moment. The Ukrainian side has released almost no images or no videos. We have had Russian side literally filming the movement of the transport troops, but I even had to cut that part because of all the insanity here. And if you notice, even the officials have refrained from directly commenting on this attack. Even the political figures are using ambiguous language. And this whole operation involves regular army units rather than military intelligence forces. And to those of you who probably don't know, military intelligence forces is where all the volunteers from other nations go, where the Belarusians fighting for Ukraine are, where most of the Americans fighting for Ukraine are. Like, everyone who was a volunteer from other country went in there because they're better used that way. Because military intelligence, the GUR, they're more flexible. This was a planned army operation, not a GUR operation, basically. Now, first difficulty comes that we know that they went in there and captured the territory, but we have no idea how many of them were there. There are media outlets that suggest that there might be thousands of participants, tons of them, and there are certainly lower bounds coming from the Russian side. And the only thing that I can tell you with guarantee is that lowest estimate is 1,000 people, but that seems unrealistic. But this is the lowest documented case, 1,000 people. It's definitely higher than that, but it's certainly not a lower thing because this is an operation, not an attack. But this is important because again, the numbers themselves are just weird. We don't even know how much this happens. And even before I start talking about the towns and villages Ukrainian forces have entered, I even have to explain the situation here. See, this whole mess is complex, and if you've just seen nice little maps with lines drawn on them and areas colored in, this drove me insane for the past few days. You see, there is very little distinction, at least no clear distinction between territories right now if you look at various maps which are under Ukrainian or Russian control. There are certainly areas under full Ukrainian control, such as townships near the Ukrainian border, and areas under limited control, where Ukrainian troops are present but cannot fully operate. However, although they do not control a certain point, they prevent Russians from entering the said point. And then there are also various territories that Ukrainians enter episodically, like the towns of Lvov and Rilsk, which were just traded through. And maps from various researchers and media, even like Ukrainian ones and everyone, because no one has information, if you look at them, they provide you the most conservative estimates. If you've seen something on TV, that's a very conservative estimate because no one wants to overdo the numbers. And they only show the territories under full Ukrainian control, and sometimes, in rare cases, some areas where Ukraine is present, if there are geolocated images or videos from those places, which are super rare. Now, at the time of recording this episode, I have not seen the town of Suja, marked as captured, center of the town. So the front line seems to be surrounding it. Local authorities also report that Ukraine doesn't control the town, but it has been shot at, and we have evidence of military activity there. So I kind of agree currently, from what I know, that Ukrainians haven't captured it at the moment of recording this. However, this does not mean the Ukrainian troops aren't present through the town and beyond, and that there are Russian troops inside it. Okay? It's just that they might not have taken over the administration, but they could prevent Russian troops from coming in there. And I was specifically told to explain this to you because for a person that just looks at a nice little number or area colored in a certain kind of color on a map, no one tells you this. And this is what pisses off a lot of people right now, analytics especially, and people in the military as well. So don't trust what they're saying. You're seeing the most conservative estimates, and we just don't know. This is where I have to admit that what we don't know. Because, again, the situation is the fact that it's just sometimes easier to cut off Russia from entering somewhere than it is just to go in, occupy everything. That's a mess, administrative control and all this stuff. It's complicated, basically, is what I'm saying. So, we just know the maximum boundaries of advance and everything. And I hope that I explained this to you properly. Like I said, I had to run this past quite a few people. So there are things that I just have to mention so that they will be absolutely clear for you, okay? So far, the Ukrainian forces have 100% constantly, which is what you see on all the maps, captured the villages of Sverdilovko, Zelyony Silhan, Leonidovo, Lyubimovka, Novy Ivanovka, and Malaya Loknya. And currently, fights are ongoing in Suja, where the Ukrainians are present, obviously. There have been reports of fighting near the settlements of Korenevo, Kormsky, Biki, and Martinovka, but I cannot verify anything from that because no one has sent me any photos or videos of those places. But, well, the Z channels, as you'll hear later on, they're complaining about the situation. Again, sorry for this, but I was specifically told to give you an explanation of what it actually is. So they were advancing there for the first 2 days, and by the middle of the third day, the pace of the Ukrainian advance had slowed. If you look at the distance covered, it was about 9 miles or 15 kilometers into Russian territory. And it's actually easy to understand why if you know something about how this war is going. And this is going to counter a lot of weird arguments there. See, this distance represents the effective operating range of FPV drones and small artillery if stationed in Ukraine. To proceed further on, howitzers and other heavier artillery would need to enter Russian territory, which, by the way, we have seen over these past few days. Well, I certainly have. Images of the 2S1 Gvozdidka self-propelled howitzer and, of course, 777, 3-axis, as they call it, howitzers also have been pulled in the Russian territory. The advance, most likely, has stalled not because, as Ramzan Kadyrov and Russian propaganda like you to believe, the arrival of Chechen elite unit Akhmat, but because the Ukrainians are logically following the standard military practice. They're digging trenches in captured territories, building fortifications, mining roads, and moving artillery over the border. I suspect the whole situation in this captured area of Kursk region to last for weeks, possibly a month, depending on the Ukrainian command's objectives, the losses that they can afford, and the reserves available for this operation. As this is not a raid, as we have seen before, this is a full-fledged military operation, and the most important thing that everyone seems to be an expert on and asked me to comment on and just disposed everywhere. Well, there is a mess, but what's the goal of the situation? And I'll just hit you with an unpopular opinion. Like, I'll start with that. My show is known for these things. I just have to do it. Kursk nuclear power station is not the goal. It's not even an intended goal. Nothing's going to happen there. Okay? For starters, it is way too far away. As I just mentioned, Ukrainian advance has stalled 15 kilometers inside Russia, which is the operating range of combat FPV drones. So, and each additional 15-kilometer advance would be more challenging than the previous one because, troops can't simply go straight forward. They need to secure their flanks to protect supply lines and avoid being surrounded. The further they go, the wider the flanks they need. This is similar to how Russians failed to advance near Pokrovsk in Donetsk region, where they just couldn't push from Ochernye to Mirnokhrad or Pokrovsk. They had to secure their flanks at various villages along the way. The same logic applies to this power plant near Kursk, which is, 60 kilometers away. Securing the flanks for such an advance would require significantly more forces, soldiers, and resources. And the resources the Ukraine is already struggling to maintain, as you can see in Russian advances near Torchetsk and Pokrovsk, where the situation is a bit more heavy, a bit more difficult and everything. And from a military perspective, capturing the Kursk nuclear power plant is not feasible. Reaching the plant is one thing, but holding it? That's a totally different story. Imagine trying to maintain a 40-mile, 60-kilometer-long supply route. I consider this to be just unrealistic to the point of idiocy, and everyone who's screaming about it, including a bunch of Z people, they just don't know what they're talking about. Now, some people, of course, also speculate that this territory, this captured territory, could be used as a bargaining chip, perhaps exchanging parts of the Kursk region for Ukrainian territory. Then there is this idea that this operation was meant to demonstrate the vulnerability of the Russian army and the Ukrainian ability to conduct operations on Russian soil. Now, I really, really agree with the latter part, but I also am not exactly understanding from my own experience, and some people whom I know who are very much experts in this matter, the true experts, we just don't get it, how this significantly strengthens Ukrainians' negotiating position at all. See, regarding a potential territorial exchange, from a military point of view, I don't see it happening, especially with the United States election approaching in November. See, as we all know, Putin views Ukrainian government as a puppet of the United States, or some Western elites, but mostly the states. Watch Dugin's and watch interview with Tucker Carlson, and then watch Tucker Carlson interview Dugin, or just listen to my podcast about it. It's obvious. So Putin thinks he'll deal directly with the United States administration. So he delays the potential negotiations because, well, what's the point? What's the point of talking before November? And everything could change in November. So at this point, nothing's going to happen there. If you hold captured territories for several months, that's extra costly. And by costly, and again, another thing that I was told to speak about here, and I know that all of you who are of a military background, you're laughing completely straight up right now because I have to explain this, but it is what it is. Folks from Langley, hey, you should support me more. Basically, costly here involves risks involved. See, if you miscalculate the necessary resources and potential losses, then that could result in not only losing this newly captured territory, this foothold, but you can risk the collapse of the whole front line in critical areas like Donetsk region. The stakes are super high here. And, well, for other reasons that have been loud in the first few days where just people blasted out these whole things without reason, there were reports that Ukrainian forces captured the Sudzha gas station, allegedly a hub for Russian gas supplies to Europe. While the pipeline does pass through Ukraine, cutting it off isn't as simple as it sounds. You can't really capture the refinery point, you have to capture the separation point. So they took it. Was this the main goal? Doesn't seem likely to me. After all, most of Europe is gradually moving away from Russian gas, so an operation of this scale likely has other objectives. In my opinion, and I'll be cynical and deeply realistic here, the most plausible goal is to divert Russian troops from other front lines, with added benefits. Previous raids by Ukrainian military intelligence didn't achieve this goal, but this one is much larger in scale. We have already seen Russian equipment being transferred from the North Group, which is stationed in Ukraine. This group was initially formed from border guard units, whose job was to repel such attacks. However, the most dangerous front line for Ukraine is the Donetsk region, where the Russian Center Group is stationed. And so far, I haven't received any evidence of their equipment being transferred at all. There were reports of conscripts being relocated to fend off the attack, but this again remains unverified. However, since conscripts often partake in border patrols and the Kursk region isn't considered part of the special military operations zone, seems credible. Russian commanders are really, known for doing things because of orders and thinking about consequences later anyways. So it's quite possible that they just sent in conscripts and then someone yelled at them, or didn't even, because nobody knows really. But the big point is that the element of surprise that lasted for these first 2 days, it allowed the Ukrainians to advance as far as they did. The surprise is now gone, so the advance is very unlikely to continue at the same pace. Now, Ukraine already has achieved some secondary objectives, such as boosting the morale of its army and society, and once again, and this I want to point out, calling into question Putin's red lines. For a week now, and more, Western and even American equipment have been operating in internationally recognized Russian territory, not considering Crimea or everything, capturing settlements and everything, and guess what? Like I said, no nuclear response. Again, for some reason, there are many people who just refuse to accept the fact that for Russia to be taken seriously about their nukes, they have to deny it first. That's basic KGB guidebook. I can email you the guidebook. Just send me an email to theeasternmore@gmail.com. But like I always say, if Putin yells at you and says that he's going to drop nukes, he won't. If he vehemently denies that he'll do something, then you watch out. It's proven time and time again. Remember Crimea and all this stuff. So I highly doubt that he's going to do anything like that. Additionally, many Russian conscripts have been taken prisoner, which is a sensitive topic for Russian authorities because, again, there was a very clear promise that Putin made at the early war that these conscripts will not participate in the territories of Russia. So, Ukraine might have gotten a lot of points for a valuable prisoner exchange. And yes, this is cynical given that I'm talking here about human lives, and some of these people I even know, But from a purely military perspective, Ukrainian intelligence services have also shown that effectiveness by convincing the Russian command that the large equipment moved to the Sumy region were for defensive purposes. Or, that is the charitable take that I've heard from some people. In private, however, a lot of them have said to me that it's just that, like in that meme, we're just so lucky that they're this fucking dumb. And that is the position which we'll get to later on the show, and I'll start quoting the vatniks, because that part at least I didn't have to verify and I'll do tons of work for. Now, importantly enough, for all of you listeners here, because this targets your politicians, this operation is a very strong argument against a lot of Western officials who suggest reducing military aid to Ukraine due to lack of success. But, everyone warns me, everyone that I've spoken with, and that I've called with, that I've communicated with, everyone warns me to be, about this whole alter happiness point at this moment. I have now become skeptical about this potential success here. I highly doubt that any Russian troops will be transferred from the Donetsk region, where the situation is most critical for Ukraine. The nuclear power plant is just too far away, and it's really not clear what it will even achieve. And potential peace talks are even further off, like they're coming from November. So lots of things could go wrong. It's a gamble. Crazy one at that. But, one thing that is on Ukraine's side at least is that Putin utterly does not give a flying fuck about his own people. So he just doesn't care. He even denies any of this happened. But the objective results, when we turn away from all the outrage this has caused in Russian society and everything, and the media victories, the results of this operation likely really boil down to these secondary objectives. And, potential Ukrainian advances in the Kharkiv region, from where the parts of the Russian units might be relocated. However, this also isn't that nice, because the front line in the Kharkiv region near Volchansk has been stalled for weeks and wasn't even dangerous for Ukraine at this point. And I've heard serious arguments, that erasing the situation near Kharkiv would allow Ukrainian units to be redeployed to Donetsk region. But if you think about it, now they would also be needing to send reinforcements to the Kursk region to protect the situation. And, during this operation, Russia has already lost a few helicopters, tanks, about 100 soldiers. A lot were taken prisoner, and, quite a lot were killed during the armored column strike near Rilsk, which is something that I actually had to skip for this episode. Otherwise, I'd go insane from all the amounts of information. This is Prigozhin mutiny levels of stress for me, to be honest. However, these losses, sadly, aren't that critical for the Russian army. Meanwhile, if you look at how the West, again, has been very slow with its deliveries of equipment, we have to take into account that destruction of, say, Stryker infantry carrier vehicles, Marders, and Buk air defenses, they represent significant losses for Ukraine. You see, this is maybe an attempt to go all out and really to push through this aspect that your red lines that you're worried about are nonsense. Look, it's kind of like me screaming in this microphone all the time. They just decided to prove it by force, and obviously this is what happened. But unless this really does cause some change of mindset, which I hope it will, but I cannot have any opinion or information about what's going on in those political circles. I'd rather think this was an opportunistic continuation of a previous strategy. And again, I'd be careful to celebrate. This will definitely get more updates. I just want to put everyone on realistic ground. On the other hand, obviously, the situation doesn't look anywhere near as bright on the Russian side as well. And here we will switch to our favorite Z channels, as I normally do. But first, logical end of first part is over, and I really do have to remind you, please, people, if you are my patron, thank you. If you're not yet, then please go to patreon.com/easternborder to become a patron, or just, donate the show some of your hard-earned money via the homepage theeasternwar.lv, where you can also find a link to our merch. It's in the pinned post on top, and you also can just click the donate button and become a member that way. Again, this has delayed me from sleeping or working on the foreign policy media article, which really hurts my finances because we now have to get these HPV vaccines and they're horrendously expensive. And, I try to give you some actual good information. So if you want to support this, please do. But that's only if you can, because I understand the economical situation being what it is with all the stock market crashes and everything. But, it still worries me. But, I'll try to balance that one out by just releasing more episodes. Then I could maybe scrounge up some of that stuff from ad money and all this nonsense. It's just that it's a bit difficult for everyone. And I just think that I should maybe work harder and bring you better episodes. I'm not trying to do the clickbaity thing. But one thing that I'm going to do after all this is I'm going to give you a good dose of all these vatniks and what they are all about, because, well, that is the best source that we have from the Russian side right now, which is quite crazy, to be honest. I don't even know how they're going insane after Kartapolov's law with gadgets, and that story isn't over yet as well. And now this. A good overview on the situation in Kursk region was published by the author of Z Channel. Let you all know, at this point, philologist in ambush. In brief, the author agrees with other Z channels. No quick victories await the Russian army in the near future. There is no one to fight, and those who are there are not in the best of shapes. Quote, the forces involved continue to be insufficient even for sustainable stabilization of the situation, let alone defeating the enemy group. They're lacking not only quantitatively, but also qualitatively. On the enemy's side, there he speaks about Ukrainians, obviously, for those of you who are new here, there are quite well-staffed units and formations. So far, we have a hodgepodge of fire departments on a patchwork quilt and not enough in terms of numbers. I'm not going to judge about some strategic reserve units and formations, but as the events of these few days have shown, we have no operational reserves at all. To buy time in crisis, reserves are being transferred from other parts of the front, and not only from the nearest Kharkiv direction, but also from other directions, including those in which our troops have had at least some limited successes in the last few months, thus further weakening our already thinning orders in these directions. Reserves arriving from other areas are by definition incomplete due to existing losses, because again, like I said before, my comment here, these losses never went anywhere, and it was very important that they actually, lacked the people. This is why they send those people with crutches and everything on the front lines. But carrying on. These losses are often quite high due to the poor organization of combat work and with poorly supported attacks as a part of a strategy that requires an offensive in all possible areas. Plus, not all formations and units can be pulled from other directions entirely, as they are directly involved in offensive actions. As a result, against the initially quite complete formations and units of the enemy grouping, we largely have a scattering of misfires of the model of the sagging BTJs of the summer of 2022. Add to this the Ukrainian advantage in military technical terms, including communication systems and UAVs, organizational structures, primarily in separate units and subdivisions of strike UAVs, and a flexible system of operational control which allows them to adequately respond to changes in the situation and timely fire and identify targets. And, well, we get a very definite assessment of the performance of our top military leadership, including first and foremost, Gerasimov. But, I wouldn't say Gerasimov. They obviously stopped short of criticizing Putin. Even then, they were obviously yelling all the time that Putin was not in control and he seemed panicky. But then this episode would be insanely more longer than it already is. But I might touch this in the future. Now, Battalion Vostok, Telegram's channel, draws readers. And once again, I have to greet History Impossible. Hello, Alex. This one's for you because I picked this one out. Because for some reason, they are getting more naggy the fact of China. See, once again, we have a post that says, in context here for the geopolitical situation, They draw attention to the fact that China, as it turns out, is not a very good ally of the Russian army. One could even say it's not an ally at all. Quote, after the operation undertaken by Ukraine, military analysts subjected all the features of Ukrainian tactics to a detailed analysis. Technical nuances that gave Ukraine an advantage were noted. For example, the frequency ranges of the FPV drones and other UAVs used were outside the limits of suppression by Russian, well, he says our, but I'm just specifying so that you know, REBs. Shifted, as the analysts put it. This allowed the breakthrough units to operate more efficiently than they could have done with equal competitive capabilities. And what provides those capabilities? Or who? Well, we are participating in this technology race. And being a small division by the standards of state corporations, we're striving to be as flexible as possible. We're always monitoring changes at the front and making adjustments to the equipment that we hand over to the front. But the most powerful obstacle in this case, for us, is our dear China. Recently, we finally received a batch of components in the shifted range. That is different from the most common ones. Almost the entire batch turned out to be defective, despite the fact that the products were not cheap. Timing of deliveries, payment terms, quality of deliveries, periodic bans on the shipment of certain types of goods. We can say that China honestly fulfills all Western regulations in relation to Russia. Ukraine does not face such problems. No one forbids China to trade with it with goods of dual or direct purpose. It is extremely annoying to feel such dependence on such a friend who will only rejoice at our weakening. They will just bargain for more discounts on oil. But China is not the only big problem. The big hit, like the really, really big hit, which is the funnier part, was the previously mentioned strike on the column. See, the attack on this convoy, judging by the new videos that I've seen, was one of the bloodiest in the history of this conflict. Ural trucks and Kamaz trucks transporting infantry were hit, and in this regard, all these Z channels in the third year of the war are discussing the important question of when the Russian military will finally learn something new. From my side perspective, they haven't, they won't, nothing will change. This is going to happen. Roman Alechin, for example, posts a kind of a citing post, quote, For the driving in column today, we need a firing squad who gave the order to move in columns in Copter's observation zone and consequently to be hit by HIMARS is not only an asshole, but should be sentenced according to the laws of war. Today, it's an assault unit, and I don't care what the rank is, private or the commander. Those who themselves command movement in a column, being in the column themselves, are total assholes. But often, you can't send them to assaults anymore because there's no one to send. Although, we know that assholes will often survive and somehow get positions with medals for having survived. Well, then we, of course, have Glorious 13. You should remember that guy. He always swears a lot. Just prepare for that. He the criminal guy who's illegal even there by Russian standards. And he writes the following. And I really had to translate it with difficulties because, oh boy, sometimes math is very, very hard to translate into proper English. Quote, in the third year of the war, you could already teach a monkey how to fuck a mannequin, but not some ministry staff general who gives orders for such murderous marches in the frontline zone. Who will be responsible for the formation of the next column? What are you brainless creatures doing? I also skipped some of the weirdest terms in there, but that's fine. But yeah, Military Informer, an official journal, writes, quote, to hit a column with firearm aimed at a considerable distance and corrected by satellite navigation, it is necessary that this column, as a herd of dumbass sheep, stood in the open and did not move anywhere until it was found out by a reconnaissance drone, which transmitted information and then worked on it. Not only that, but they left people sitting in the backs of the trucks, which turned the destruction of the convoy into a natural massacre. Passing locals have already filmed everything, as the consequences were left standing until morning. Oh, by the way, the guy who filmed it, he's already, on the Russian side, he's already been sent to jail and is being, accused of being a traitor to the government. We've heard stupid theories all around, such as the guy who filmed this was actually working with Ukrainian special services and all this stuff. And besides the fact that they're, by the way, continuing to post all sorts of weird things about Polish flags being raised somewhere in evil, Poles doing something. Americans are also back running the whole situation because, as per usual tactics, which they often do, which they always do, to be honest, the enemy is at the same time super weak and miserable, and at the same time extra scary. It makes no sense. But carrying on to finish the military informer's quote, all this is a consequence of not only the impenetrable stupidity of a particular person who organized this movement in a column near the border on the third year of the war, and then it's standing in one place, but also a consequence of the general situation of chaotic pulling of reserves to the area of the breakthrough for which they were not prepared at all. This is another parallel with the fall of 2022 in Kharkiv region, where the enemy also hit columns with reserves, which were coming to plug the front. We see no point in bemoaning the lack of learning once again. We're just describing the facts, and maybe someone will remember how not to do it. Again, I have to say they haven't, they won't. They learn slowly, and only then in very tiny amounts, and even then it's kind of not happening. But, because of how long it took me to actually write all this stuff out, here's some stuff from literally this morning as I record this. The situation of the front as it is today. And they continue to follow these events in the Kursk region with sadness, which, despite my quite clear military analysis from the Ukrainian perspective, which looks like a gamble, I do have to state that on the Russian side, the realistic situation on the ground is probably not as good. They're not really prepared or planned for this. So this is going to be one hard time for me ahead, early next week at least, and even more possibly. Two Majors, another Telegram channel that you probably know from all my reports, writes, quote, "We are forced to admit that the enemy, skillfully using our blatant failures in defense, managed to organize a large-scale military invasion operation with the simultaneous use of significant forces and means. At the same time, the fact that today the Russian armed forces already managed to organize some counteractions rather emphasize not the military art of the enemy, but the tragic consequences of lying to the top in beautiful reports, which is still to be dealt with after a long operation to liberate the Kursk region is over." Again, these guys still all continue to be optimistic about that something will change in the Russian army, although no one will. At all. Because I think that is just impossible in theory. And then there is Yuri Podolyaka, who's a Ukrainian traitor who works for Russian propaganda now, and he's very connected with the official propaganda like Solovyov's and all these other people. So when he starts revealing some situation in the front lines, it means just that it's gone too deep and it's too late. And he writes in Mir Sevodnya with Yuri Podolyaka, quote, "Unfortunately, there is no good news again. Knocking the enemy out of Martinovka, a very tiny village, with which today's 24 hours began, was the only successful episode for us so far. Further on, the enemy was still advancing. We see that the situation continues to deteriorate rapidly, and I personally do not understand what those who say that victory is close are counting on. As far as I understand, the situation for the next few days will be mostly on the defensive." And by the way, Putin's reaction to all this was basically to give $100 offered generously to people who had to leave their homes. Although officially there is no evacuation, they just increased literally the traffic of trains away from the region, and the official statement was because of increased customer demand. Really, the official Russian government states that nothing has happened. Like, for one, everyone in the West is more worried that they're going to overreact, drop nukes, go insane. Meanwhile, the real reaction is that for Putin, like, they have to inform Putin that something bad has happened, which would then lead to a cascading wave of bad reports and lies, and they'll get in trouble. No one wants that. No one wants to do that. Why? See, Putin has to know that stuff is bad. He probably even doesn't. And even if he does, even he cannot admit defeat, because that would just ruin his image completely, even like, especially among those people whom he had like kind of put into this massive nationalism. It is impossible. For him to react to a negative event, he has to admit that something bad has happened, which he never has and never will. For them, everything's under control because he does not care about the people, even though the people are even actually begging him to do something. And some are just resigning and saying that, yeah, I might as well be with Ukraine. I don't know. Like, people judge him as if he was a normal leader. Let me remind you that he's a mafia boss that lives by понятия, the Soviet prison laws, of which I wrote an article about and have mentioned many episodes in. He is continuing this war for the very simple reason that as long as he's fighting the war, he will not admit that he's actually lost it economically, that his plans were ruined when Kiev wasn't taken in 3 days. That's the moment when this was lost already. But as long as he's fighting, as long as he's doing this, he can just manage and pull through. Maybe he'll get lucky on something, I don't know. That's how he sees the situation. And this is the reaction every time something unexpected to him happens, which is why it's really important. But carrying on from specific news from today, Ribar, one of the biggest Telegram channels, writes, quote, "With the relative stabilization of the situation in the Kursk region, it may seem that the offensive potential of the Ukrainians in the direction has dried up, and it will not be difficult to knock them out of the captured border settlements. However, this way of thinking is erroneous and dangerous. Besides, there is a certain set of characteristic signs indirectly testifying that the main blow of Ukrainian formations is still ahead. Шапку закидательства, literally throwing the opposition to death with hats, which means believing in super easy victories because of Russian heroism, that's a term there, and hasty conclusions that there is no one to fight in the so-called Ukraine, as they continue to call Ukraine the so-called one, led to said consequences like those that we saw in the few days earlier in the border area." Another good frenemy of the show, one of my favorite nemesis, Anastasia Kashevarova. By the way, please feel lucky that you don't listen to her personally. Her voice just makes me go insane. It's just beyond stupid. She writes, quote, "Very hard on the Kursk direction, but the guys tell us that, quote, even if someone has failed, we're obliged to defend our homeland. There is no other way." Well, I have to say that if you wouldn't attack Ukraine, you didn't have to do this, but it is what it is. But she continues, "And here we go questions for the defense minister and the general staff. Why the fuck do they drive freely on the roads? Why do our pickup trucks have only humanitarian ones, which you do not want to register? And gentlemen from the defense ministry, where is your intelligence? How many kilometers away can you hear the clanking of heavy equipment coming en masse? You hit Odessa, Kharkiv, Kiev sometimes, but the accumulation to the border is missed?" Well, and here again, I have to say the same thing every day that, nukes don't start flying, because that was what a lot of people expected, at least in the West, from my sources. I haven't expected that this was the utmost red line, which should never be crossed, which is why, for a long period of time, Western weapons were not allowed to be used in these territories, okay? Everyone's just afraid because they don't listen to the show, and I hope that they sometimes read my articles, but again, this whole showing that Putin is just, all words and intimidation tactics as an ex-KGB officer. Well, never really an ex, but still, it's not going to come to real action. He used to be a strong macho guy. Right now, he's now a senile, delusional dictator who's surrounded himself with yes men and psychopaths. Again, let me remind you, he doesn't know how to use the internet. He doesn't have a smartphone. He reads internet reports bringing to him in red binders by his secret services. He's an old, poor man with failing health who just doesn't know how to adapt to times. That's all. And if you continue to be afraid of him, you just give him more strength. That's it. Military informant writes about today. Again, this is all, these all are news from what I've read today and gathered for you, because I had throughout my previous set to some of these things not being kind of irrelevant, and I was asked not to. So the next phase of the border battle will be the finalization of the new front line, the withdrawal of the Ukrainians from the weak and remote positions and consolidation on more stable ones, from where they will now have to be forged for a long time with heavy fighting. All this is a consequence of the fact that the threat of invasion, for various reasons, aka stupidity, which just add for myself, was ignored until the very last moment, which will now result in the waste of reserves, the deaths of many people, and destruction of infrastructure. That's from military informant. But, this should show you the situation happening there. However, I had to include some messages because of the sheer bizarreness of the world that, I don't know, Dugin has created in his mind, or what the Vatniks have in their, whatever resembles brains in their situation. See, an amazing text in its absolute idiocy, and I mean beautiful to the point of being painful, was published by the channel Diary of a Paratrooper. There's everything you want to know. There's evil America, enemies in power who will be afraid of something, and an unexpected course of on transparency and honesty is going to be undertaken by Russian leaders. And the most unexpected conclusion: it turns out that the expansion of the war to the Kursk region once again proves the need for rapprochement between Russia and North Korea. Yes. And about the mysterious Russian soul, of course. This is a perfect text for your weekend, in other words, because this contains Duginisms to the extremes. Quote, "It is still early and difficult to say about the enemy's plans, but this breakthrough was chosen by the Ukrainians and Naglosaksy." And he writes Naglosaksy, which is a wordplay of Anglo-Saxons, because Anglo-Saxons everywhere, but Naglest is kind of like having chutzpah a lot, being one of those edgy people, being shameless in a way, but in a more edgy way. And here he kind of mixes it in with this, just to explain the idiom here. Was chosen by the Ukrainians. Well, he uses the word that I will not say on the show for Ukrainians, and then he writes Anglo-Saxon, chosen by them correctly. A large number of roads unprepared in unprepared territory by us for their attack. A large number of forest areas on the one hand. Their tactic is competent. Having gathered a fist in one area, the enemy raided more, even for surprise and media news. In fact, they wanted to hold a bridgehead in the direction that they will clearly not be able to. But the most important thing is that the collective West, like instantly all of us, right? Cool. Miscalculated is that it opened the eyes of all Russians. Pro tip, it didn't. It didn't. I know. I've spoken to them. It didn't. Because Putin denies everything. Putin says everything's under control. Well, it's not. No one in Moscow is really informed. Like, if you watch only the news on TV, you don't know anything. It's crazy. So this is just awesome how this detached from reality this whole thing is. Oh boy. The war is not ephemeral. It's near. And the house on the edge. Moja chata z kraju. Like, my house is the edge of the village. I don't care about what's happening there. Another Russian idiom. This will not work this time. In addition, the enemy sitting in power, because here he obviously, as all Vatniks, speak about the liberal elites, so-called liberal elites, such as Maria Zakharova, the leader of the central bank, which, if you listen to my previous episode with Heaton, then you know what I'm talking about. All these people, they're the enemies within. They always blame people, actually, do real economy, not this make-believe stuff that Putin tells them to. They're all Western liberals, although they're all scumbags as well. But still, they have realized that to sit on these chairs that they have now is possible only under electric voltage. Execution for them is inevitable. And most importantly, everyone saw that the people are no longer hungry. Now people can see everything, and lying is inadmissible. Now we and the state must become and will become a single mechanism and go not to the capitalist systems. Although, what is Russia today? Well, kleptocracy, but, still. But towards the east, where our comrades from Democratic People's Republic of Korea, People's Republic of China, Vietnam, and other countries that have not been seen sponsoring terrorists. Because I don't know why. It's beautiful, everything about this. He finishes this, thank you, enemies, for rallying us. And for this strategy, you will never understand the Russian soul. I mean, if I would say that we will never understand the Russian soul because of the sheer weirdness that it presents, and I try to explain it to you guys, but I'm not always succeeding. I mean, some people even have translated that as racism, but look, this is what they say personally, okay? I'm agreeing with him here. I don't even know, because this is just bizarre. Because if this is the Russian soul, then hey, not sure there's much to understand there. However, there are three final short things that are just brilliant. Because all this mess about how this is portrayed, which also countered the previous stupid post, is presented in kind of an entertaining math lesson way for its subscribers by the Russian MiG channel. And this is brilliant. According to official reports, at first only 300 Ukrainians entered the Kursk region. The next day, the head of our general staff gave our president a different number, 1,000. Yesterday, according to the bulletin news in RIA Novosti, almost 700 were destroyed. Today, 280 were destroyed. Well, it turns out that there's 20 people remaining? 50? Or what's going on? And the answer is simple. Business as usual and pretending everything's fine. And this is why Russia will not win this war. Because you cannot. Even with all the baggage of equipment down there, impossible. If after this West just allows Ukraine to fully use its equipment everywhere and just starts delivering more stuff, we're going to see way more insane wonders. Again, the subject and the meme of this is that this would be a total gamble as I really approach the strategy by contacting with competent people, more competent than I am, and applying my own analytics and everything. So the first part was dry from a perspective of fighting a realistic war. But we have to remember, we're very lucky that they're fucking dumb. And the dumbness has led to the point that previously mentioned Two Mayors channel. They have begun to slightly suspect something. And again, in these cases, do have to agree with them. Quote, we have fears that there will be no conclusions drawn from the troops and the bodies after the Kursk region, because these conclusions will be made by the same people who allowed such development of the situation in the first place. But again, never mentioning any words or anything. Again, this just proves me right. But finally, I do have to say something, because we haven't spoken about a certain person here in a while. I'm talking, of course, about our number one buddy, Girkin. Buddy in the most hateful sense humanly possible. See, I want to end today's episode and finally, get some relaxation time with a nice little quote because of a question that the channel Alcoholic Historian asks that, I think it's pretty easy to answer to if you use your brains, but that's something that will never happen in those front lines. Quote, right now, Strelkov, Girkin, is in jail for speaking openly about corruption and incompetence of the highest army officials. And now, one part of these officials is under investigation for corruption cases, while the other part stupidly missed a full-fledged offensive by the enemy. Seems like it's time to apologize and let the man go free? No? The answer is obviously no. Precisely because he did this. Again, and I mentioned this previously, if the Russian army would have listened to Girkin, Strelkov, then we'd be in a much worse situation. Because he's a villain. Let me remind you, he's already sentenced to serve a term in The Hague for the crash of the MH17 plane. He started the whole war under his own ambition. He's a total villain, but he's competent when it comes to military terms. And in the Russian army, thankfully for us, loyalty and blind obedience is valued more. So, on the one hand, if you look at the purely strategic perspective of all the situation and you analyze this by just turning off all these emotional factors and everything, you look at the objective situation on the front and how a reasonable person would lead from the other side and all this data gathering, this is a gamble. Maybe not a really understandable one. And, there's still plenty of reasons to be quite skeptical about massive successes there. However, if you take into account all this mess that's going on in the Russian army, that Ukrainians are well informed about, because, well, they captured a lot of prisoners, because turns out people kind of don't want to die, and they're not very well trained, and, well, that army officials are abusing them in the Russian side, gamble seems to be slightly more understandable. Well, that's it for today. This was a long episode, but again, I spent a lot of time working on it, had to rewrite a bunch of stuff, double check, triple check everything. I'll deal with other stuff now. Tomorrow's going to be the next episode of Heaton, and I'll probably be digging deep into this for at least the early part of next week as well. And again, please, if you can, do consider supporting the show. I mean, it's not easy because I try to make something that's useful for you and not clickbaity, and I'm not sure how advertisers like my show anyway. But yeah, that's it for today. До свидания, товарищи. And remember, happiness is mandatory.